All right, well let's go ahead and like actually formally kick it off. This series for me has been titled Learning Quick, and it's a play off of my last name. It's a play off of like in the South, I don't say it, but people say like I'm going to learn you something, so you're kind of teaching something, so you're teaching quick in me, and then also I am learning quickly, a new topic, and we talked about this a second ago. It's just a great way for me to get forced into something that I've been meaning to take a look at in a safe environment in the sense that I've got someone to help guide me through it. So with me today is Dan Vega, and if you want to go ahead and give an intro for all the cool stuff that you do, go ahead.
Yeah. So first and foremost, my day job, I'm a curriculum developer for a coding boot camp called Tech Elevator. So I get to work on the curriculum. I'm working on all the different exercises and tutorials and documentation that both our students and our instructors work with. So we have 6 campuses. If you want to learn more about us, techelevator.com. Personally, I've been a software developer for over 20 years now. Just really enjoy teaching others. I think I found that early on in my career. And over the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years, I've really gotten into like courses and YouTube. But I've been blogging for 15 years. So like that was my intro to like really helping people is, I like, and again, 15 years ago in the blog world was much different than it is today. I'd find something and like really struggle through it and then go, I think I could like teach this to someone else and
Mm-hmm.
make sure that people that come across this same issue don't have the same struggles that I just did. So that's, I think, really where all this started. And I'm just, I am not, software development is not my work. It is definitely my passion. It is something I do every day. It's something that I enjoy reading a book on the weekend about.
Yeah.
And like I said, I really like to take what I've learned and kind of teach that to others. So a
Yeah, that's
little
actually
bit about me.
cool. That may be a perfect transition to one of my like brand mottos is learn, build, teach. Take time to learn stuff. Take what you learn to build stuff, and then teach other people how to do it as well. And it helps reinforce all the things that you thought you understood. Because once you have to teach it to somebody else, you realize pretty quickly whether or not you actually understand what you thought you did beforehand.
Right. And even something as simple, again, I teach at a boot camp, or I at least write documentation and tutorials for a boot camp, but like things that you use every day, you realize that you don't like know them as well as like you
Mm-hmm.
probably could. Like if somebody asked you right now to explain to somebody like how an array in JavaScript works, like to someone who doesn't know that, you might think to yourself that's easy, but like it's not. Like it's
Yep.
easier to teach to somebody who kind of knows what they're doing
Yep.
already. Like when you have to start from ground zero, like you have to reinforce yourself and go, wow, maybe I didn't know, these arrays that I use every day as well as I thought I did. So that's kind of the fun part about it too.
Yeah, you have to get, I think, creative in how you explain things and the parallels that you draw and all that sort of stuff. So I think we've got a lot more to potentially chat about, like after and in the future, about just content and teaching and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Which is why this is the first time we talked in person, I think. So, or I say in
Yep.
person, but on video. But
Right.
so it is cool to make a more personal connection now. Well, I think we can go ahead and kick it off, and I think you'll have me just kind of start off on the Gridsome homepage, and I'll let you kind of guide me from there.
Yeah, so before we actually wrote any code, I wanted to talk about just like the Gridsome website, and they do a really good job on the homepage of kind of like introducing you to what Gridsome is. And as you said, you're in the Gatsby world, so you kind of know a lot of the same principles apply. I would say Gatsby is obviously a lot bigger than Gridsome at this point. Gridsome's fairly new. You can see up in the upper right hand corner, they're on version 0.713, so not even at a 1.0 release yet. I don't know how long they've been around. I've been using them for about a year and a half now, and I think I started on like point 0.3 or something. But obviously, Gatsby is really big at this point, and
Yep.
just probably has a lot larger of an ecosystem. But I really love a lot of the things Gatsby does. And so the first thing that you'll see there, it says bring your own data, build, and deploy. And so I think this is similar where you kind of get to cram all of your data into one package and then kind of use that across your site as you need it to. So maybe you're pulling data in from a headless CMS or something like WordPress. Maybe you have a database somewhere. Maybe you have just some CSV files. And then Markdown is the big one. So my personal site, like I said, I used to use a WordPress. I used WordPress for a while. Before that, I used something in Cold Fusion, which is another server-side language that I used to use. And so my blog has kind of seen different iterations over the years. And I'm not a PHP developer. I'm not a WordPress developer. So I use WordPress because it was a fantastic blogging platform. But anytime I wanted to like change something,
Yep.
I was like, I don't know PHP. These
Mm-hmm.
themes get like out of control. And I just didn't want to live in that world anymore. I want to write and I don't want like any friction there. So I
Yep.
like the Markdown. I like Markdown in general. That's how I write every day, personally or at work. And so the idea of writing in Markdown, committing to Git, and then having that automatically deployed to my website was something that I was really interested in. So that last one is saying, basically, you can take some Markdown files and turn them into HTML pages, which is really cool. So then you get the build side of things. You build it powered by GraphQL. We were talking earlier. I saw you had a conversation with Andrew Mead on Apollo. You'll see some of the same stuff here where you have that same GraphQL interface that you guys were going through. So everything's powered by GraphQL, but the good thing is, and I think you learned this as well, you don't need to know GraphQL to get started with this. I didn't know GraphQL at all, and to be honest, I still don't. Like, it's just like a matter of tweaking queries and like finding the data that you need. And this is, again, like I said, referenced before, this is a great way to learn something if you've been interested in something but didn't have a reason. So this got me into GraphQL. And then there's the deploy side of things. I absolutely love Nullify. Being able to push to Git, have it deploy on Nullify. It's free, it's fast. I hated the DevOps side of things, and I've hated it for like 20 years now. Like, I just want to push something out to the web and have it there and not deal with any of that other stuff. So Nullify is great. I do actually pay them money. I pay them $9 a month for their analytics, which are really great. So I no longer have Google Analytics on my website, which I'm really happy about because it's faster and Google's not taking my data and your data. So that's all fun. So those are kind of the three sides of it. And if you were to scroll down, you can see like some more information on like, hey, it's easy to develop. There's some more information on like what you might be using, SEO friendly. So again, we're building static sites here. I know that there's a lot of questions when you're building like Jamstack sites, like where, what fits in that Jamstack. And this seems to be getting pushed more and more, what we're doing with static sites. But, anything that is going to end up ultimately being static content, like a marketing site. I'm working on some charity sites that are going to be in Gridsome. And like a blog, my blog has like 1,000 articles, and that is still fine. I mean, if you had something like 100,000, maybe that's something you might want to reconsider. But anything like that, I think, is great for static site generators. And so what else is on here? I think that's all we need to touch on here. So
and just
at the very top,
I'm gonna do a comment on. This is actually like when you mentioned the data section of like headless CMS, embedded CMS with Markdown files. Shout out to the stream we did yesterday, which is about the difference between those two and why you might want to use one. It was funny. I was actually migrating away from Markdown to Sanity.io as a headless CMS. Brad was going the opposite way, I think, from Contentful to embedded Markdown files. So that video will be on YouTube probably Monday. So you can go and keep an eye out for that on the James Q Quick YouTube channel.
Cool. And one more point to that, I think. So if you had a mixed environment too, like say you had some developers who really like to write in Markdown, but maybe you had a marketing team who's not gonna write in Markdown, but they wanted to go ahead and use some type of CMS. The great thing about like Gridsome and Gatsby is you get to like take all this data and put it in one place. So you could have a blog that is pulling information from a headless CMS and your Markdown, putting it into one resource, and then just displaying that on your blog. So I think that's the really exciting part about all of this.
And at least from a developer perspective, it's just always exciting to have control. I think I had the exact same pain point in WordPress of like I had a WordPress site. I didn't know anything about PHP. I didn't want to like intimately know all the WordPress APIs. Right. And I ended up moving to Gatsby eventually, and it's been like infinitely better from developer experience.
Yeah, and like I said, I like it's my website. It's my playground. I like to play around with stuff, and like I'm like redoing my layouts and like really like things that I can learn. Like I always use it as a place that I can like play around with something and learn something new. And I couldn't do that on WordPress. It was really just a blogging platform.
Yep. Cool. All right. So what would
So we're
be our
gonna
next
get
steps?
started. That get started button is really good place to get started. So if you're coming to Gridsome and you want to learn a little bit more about it, you can read the intro, you could read the why Gridsome. We're going to just kind of skip over that for now, but you can read how it works. So let's talk about a few prerequisites. You should have some HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you should understand a little bit of Vue. But as we said, we're just going to create some basic pages and some blog information today. So even if you don't know Vue, start with this, create a Vue template. We'll create a couple of Vue templates today, and that might pique your interest to then go, okay, let me head over to Vue website and learn a little bit more about Vue. So, and then it says Gridsome requires Node.js 8.3 and above and recommends Yarn. I actually don't use Yarn. I still use NPM. So it's not a requirement. It's just a recommendation, it looks like.
And
So
I'm
that's
the
up to
same
you.
way. I'm still an NPM person myself. I just haven't had a reason to switch. Talking about like having a reason to learn, I haven't had a reason to
Yeah.
switch, so I still use NPM myself.
Yep. Cool. All right. So the other prerequisite I'm going to say we're probably going to check for that installation, but there is, if you're going to do any Vue development, there's a really great extension out there called Viter, and that is something you'll want for VS Code.
I'm gonna grab I'm gonna grab that link and just throw it
Cool.
in the chat too. By the way, in the comments, one, especially let me know if you have any questions along the way, but I'm curious who has experience with Vue or Gridsome or React or Gatsby, just what the general experience is for the people that are in here. Let me know in the chat. Brad wrote about Vue 2 years ago, basic stuff only. Cool. He's got a little bit of intro to Vue there. Been addicted to Next lately. That's another thing that's on my backlog to learn. And that would be, it's more comparable to Nuxt. So Next being on the React side, Nuxt being on the Vue side.
Yep. Yeah, Nuxt does some really great things on the Vue side as well.
Cool. David's just starting to learn Vue, started using it in a day job. Sweet. Awesome. Cool. Well, what would be, should I go ahead and install the Gridsome
Yes.
CLI?
So we want to install the CLI and we're going to install that globally.
Let's grab this thing. I've got Hyper open, I think, somewhere. Hyper, run this. And I'm assuming like with create React app, like people started, I think probably the de facto way of creating a starter app is by using npx. I'm assuming you could do a similar type thing to at least generate the application, but then maybe there's some commands that you'd be missing if you don't have it
Yeah,
locally.
you need it to like run anytime we like go ahead and start up a site, we use this CLI. So it's just nice to have installed.
Okay, sweet.
So before we jump into the step number 2, if you could scroll down on the left, it's just nice to have a little bit of perspective on what the CLI can do. So if you go down to going API reference, if you can like open the CLI in a new tab.
Yeah. Oh, in a new tab.
That's all right. I just wanted to like stay where we were, but so this is the CLI. It's not, there isn't a lot that it does. So it has a few commands. Create, which is going to create us a new project. So it's going to take a name, which is also going to be the directory name the project is created in. So I always like to know that, like, do I need to like be in that directory or is it going to create that directory for me? So that's good to know. And then the optional argument is the starter. We're going to talk more about starters later, but there are a lot of starters that allow you to like, hey, I want to build a blog. Like, let me get you started on that. So you don't have to like write it from the ground up. Or I want to have a headless WordPress CMS pulling content into my blog. So there are a lot of starters out there, which is really great. So that's the create command. There's also a develop command you'll see as we run it. So we type in Gridsome develop, and that runs the project that we're in.
Oh,
There's a couple things there. So default support 8080. You can change that port if you wanted to. Then if we wanted to go ahead and send this off and build it, we could build it. And that's actually the command that I use on Nullify. So you go in and configure like Gridsome build. And every time I go ahead and push the git, it runs Gridsome build for me. And then Explore and Info. Info gives you some information. Explore is about the GraphQL playground. But as you'll see, when we start up an application, it actually gives us two links. It gives us a link to our website, and it gives us a link to the GraphQL playground. So we can actually look at both. So that's just good to know if you start messing around, as you start using the CLI, like what are the different commands that you can run.
cool. And these, for the most part, seem like one-to-one, like the exact same as Gatsby. Gatsby build, Gatsby develop. The GraphQL is underscore underscore. Maybe this is 3, I can't tell, but GraphQL instead of Explore, but like same general idea. So
Yep, cool. All right, so let's go back to that step number 2 on the other page. So first thing we're going to do is just create a simple Gridsome project. And we're going to do that using Gridsome create.
Gridsome create test
And then,
Gridsome project.
yeah, so again, that is going to be the name of the project, and it's actually going to create that folder and put everything in that folder for you.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and do that.
And then it'll go ahead, it'll create some files, it'll install packages. The same thing that Create React App does, same thing that Gatsby does. Pretty pretty standard process if people out there have used any of those type of frameworks for anything like that. And then there's like, at this point in a YouTube video, we would pause the video and like splice out the waiting. So we'll just sit here in like awkward silence for a few seconds while the package is finished installing. The interesting thing with live video versus YouTube.
Yep. So I'll just talk about what we're going to do. So this one, we didn't use any type of, we didn't specify a type of starter. It actually used the default Gridsome starter, which gives us this very bare bones basic project. But I like starting this with this one because it gives us an idea to just look at kind of bare bones, what's involved in a Gridsome project. So I'll go ahead and start with the Gridsome config.js. This is where all the configuration for your site is. So you can go ahead right off the bat and change the name to like whatever you want it to be. And then all of our plugins will go in there. You need to escape that. Yep. Okay. So let's first take a look at pages. Actually, let's fire this up as is.
Yeah, fair
so
enough.
Let's just go and run Gridsome develop from that directory.
And by the way, I'm an embedded terminal person myself. I'm curious what other people do, but I know shortcuts to open and close it, so I just get rid of it when I don't need it and then keep it open relatively low. There's also a shortcut, if you didn't know, to like make it a little bit bigger and smaller.
Ooh, I did not know that.
It can be really handy. So it's on Mac, it's Control Command and then up and down.
Oh,
so
cool.
you might have to have focus on it first,
right.
And then up and down. It's super cool. Let's see.
Cool. So see how it gave us a couple of those. So we do have like the site and then the GraphQL data. We're not going to touch GraphQL right now, so we don't need to go to that. But yeah, to open up localhost 8080. And so this is our very basic site. You can see it's pulling that title from that configuration we just changed. So James's cool site.
That's right.
And it gave us a Gridsome logo, a basic page. That is our home page. And then you can click on the About page in the upper right, and that switches us over to About.
And assumption here that I'm pretty sure is going to be correct. Like routing is probably taken care of for you by Gridsome. About is probably just a view component inside of the pages directory, and they take care of the routing based on the file name.
You're already ahead of it.
Cool. All right. Sorry.
No, I'm saying that's exactly. So is that how Gatsby works as well?
Yes. Yep.
Cool.
And I think like Next, I haven't actually used Next, but Next does a similar type thing. And that's, at least from my understanding, like if you're just using like Create React App, it's almost worth it to just use Gatsby because you don't really sacrifice anything. And then you get built-in routing, so you don't have to go through the process of setting up React Router.
Yeah, it's the same thing on the Vue side. I mean, you could go in and set up a new Vue project. You can set up the router and configure this all yourself and point to a component that creates a page. But that, it's a lot of like upfront work. Things like Gridsome and Nuxt does the same thing. It takes a lot of the things that you would have to like fiddle with and
Yep.
configure, and just gives it to you out of the box.
Sweet.
So let's go into the pages directory and see that in action.
Here. We can start with
So
the
anything
index.
named index is going to be the root of the root file that it's going to create. So index.vue creates index.html. About.vue creates about.html. And so if you wanted to have directories, like if you were creating a courses directory, you could create a folder called courses. And in there, you create an index.vue, and that's kind of your root page in that folder. So let's just create a new page. We'll just call it like services or something. We'll call it
Services
services.view.
view. And one thing to make sure, I don't know if I have it or not. Needed to check to see if I
Yes,
have that extension installed.
that
It
was the next
looks,
thing. So,
yeah, it looks like I do.
yep,
So I'm good
cool.
to go. Cool.
So one thing you can do in services.view, just type out view, vue, and I don't think you have
The snippets.
yeah, I
Let's see.
think, let's see, let's look at Viter and see what snippets
Oh,
are
I've
in
got it
there.
disabled. That'll do it.
Ooh.
All right, now let's see the magic in action. View. Not that one. Nope.
Huh. Let me see. Maybe my snippets are coming from somewhere else.
Let's see. If anybody, I think Pichu player, if you know where view snippets come from, they've got a Vue 2 snippets extension. They've got a Vue VS Code snippets from Sarah Drasner,
Sarah
which
Drasner snippets. That might, I do have that installed. Maybe that's
okay,
what, I never know like what features are coming from what
right,
extension. It's
yep,
just something I use every single day.
yep.
So
Let's try anything that Sarah Drasner makes has got to be good.
yeah.
Um,
And although I wonder if her snippets start with something else. Let me just see.
looks like hers start with V. So like V action, V after each, V before, that kind of stuff.
You it's always tough to figure out where something is coming from, because I know I just type view and that creates scaffolds me out a view template. So
If you type it out, if you start to type it, you can get IntelliSense in VS Code. Like this one's showing me that it's coming from Vue VS Code snippets. It'll tell you which extension that
all right,
snippet
let's
is
do
coming
that. Let
from.
me services view. So it is, was there a little info? Default.view. So how did you figure that out? How do
If
you figure
you,
out where it's coming from?
yeah, if you just type in a letter and then let the snippet come up and then hover, like
Yep.
scroll down to the snippet, it'll show
Uh-huh.
you inside of parentheses where which extension that snippet came from. I'm curious that
Mine
anybody.
doesn't.
Oh, it doesn't. Wow.
Hmm.
I don't know then.
Okay, well, we can not worry about that right now. We can come back to it. Really, all that's going to give us is a template block. So start with a template.
And
Below that,
I was just gonna say, I think because of Vtor, I now got like the autocomplete, which is maybe includes, maybe it doesn't include Emmet, but at least getting like the self-closing tag.
yeah. And then below template, we're going to create a script block, and we're going to export default. And then below that, yeah, it's an object. Sorry.
Oh, yep.
And then below script is style. So this is basically when I type out view, I just kind of get this scaffolded out for
Okay.
me. And this is the starting block to any view component. So this is a view single file component, and they call it a single file component because everything I need is in a single file. I have my markup, I have my script, and I have my styles. So we actually don't need script and styles. I just kind of wanted to show that off. But
Okay.
in our template, if you just want to put a heading 1 and call this services and save it and go back to your browser.
And then it won't be in the nav bar because we need to update that, but I should be able to go
Right.
to services directly.
I think so, yeah. Just try services.
Sweet.
Right. So now there is no layout in there. So let's go back to our services view template and let's look at like a index or about and see what's going on there.
And they
So
are
you see there's
wrapping.
a layout. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's a layout tag. And the way that works is if you go back to the file explorer
The file explorer here.
and look at main.js. So main.js is an entry point in any Vue application. And right here, we're importing this default layout from layouts/default.vue. And then using vue.component, we make this layout available to all of our pages or all of our components. And this is something we do because we're probably going to use this layout in almost any component we build. So why have to import it in every single component when we know we're going to need it there? Okay. So that's all that does. And that's how that magic makes it available on each of those.
Okay. And I was going to ask about that. So if you were referencing a component that isn't global, would you do the import inside of your script, or would it just go at the top of the file inside of the script?
Nope, you import it right inside the script. Okay. Say import layout from my components directory, and you can put it into there.
Okay, sweet. So because of what you just showed in main.js, that thing is available everywhere. And then with that, I could do something like this.
Yep, and then put that in there, and then now we'll get the wrapper that the other pages had inside of there.
There we go. Cool. All right.
So now let's go ahead and just stop the Gridsome develop and run that again. And that should go ahead and set up routing for us as well.
Does it, so making sure I understand. So the routing is working for services. Are you saying it will automatically?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. I don't know if it actually creates a menu object. No, I guess it doesn't.
Okay.
I take that back. Sorry.
Okay. So that's what I imagined. We were going to have to do that ourselves.
Yeah. So let's go into layouts. And default. Yeah. So we'll need to do that here. Okay. So I'm looking at again, any of these things that we're talking about here, whether it's the layouts or the pages or the templates or these thing called a G-link, this is all in the documentation. So under basic Gridsome, once you start to get into this, go into each of those sections and start to understand what all of these are. So this G-link is actually just a component from Gridsome that sits on top of the Vue router and just does a few other things. But for our purposes, all we need to know is that if we use that same tag, it will set up routing in our application. So I would just copy that down, change the path to /services, change the title to services, and away we go.
And I think one of the important things to note about this, at least with links in Gatsby, so there's a link component in Gatsby, which does like the exact same thing. You define a to. Underneath the hood, what it then renders out to the screen is basically an anchor tag. But with these link components that are built into the platform, these are not doing like a full refresh of the page. They're doing client-side routing to get to that page. Right. So there's no refresh. You're just swapping in the content.
Yep.
Okay.
And you can do, I know in Vue, like with the router link component, you can change, like if you didn't want it to render a link, maybe you wanted to render a button, you could do that as well. So there's all types of things you can start to configure with this stuff, which is the documentation is great at going through. So.
Okay. And I want to try something on this homepage really quickly. If I refresh, I don't know if everyone noticed or not, it's pretty quick, but the logo here will kind of, not that command, sorry. But the logo kind of starts out fuzzy and then updates. And I'm assuming Gridsome has some like built-in image optimization stuff that Gatsby image does.
So I wanted to talk about that as well. If you go ahead and right click on that and inspect that, and let's see what so we just have an image there, and then you can see there's a bunch of different data sizes. So it is doing a lot of things underneath the hood for us. So I think personally, even if my static site that I was building was going to be a one-page site, I know you can do that in plain old create an index.html and create some CSS. But people forget like how many like things you don't think of, like optimizing images for different screen sizes. And so not only does it, if you create, like, let's say we grabbed a big image from Unsplash and we threw it on our homepage, Gridsome will take a look at that and figure out what it needs to, what all the different sizes that it needs to create for that image. And not only that, but it also do lazy loading for you. So if you have a bunch of images on a page, if you want to go over to my website, danvega.dev, and we'll look at a blog post, we can kind of see it in action a little bit more. But what it'll do, it'll lazy load the images. And then as you're scrolling,
Mm-hmm.
it creates like a blurred, I don't know if that one, let's go to like a blog post. So go to blog.
Check out
Um,
like,
yeah, so just start scrolling
yep,
down. See it, that little blur. So, so what that is doing is it actually creates like uh,
a
the
blurry
same
version.
size and a base
Mm-hmm.
64 like blurred version of that image. And so just the ability to have, like, if I was going to code that from start on my own static site, like, there's a lot that goes into that. Like, you
Yep.
just don't think about. So just using Gridsome for something like that is great. And the really good thing about that is it's the component that you use is G image, and that's a component that does that for images on not only your like pages that you use, but if you use an image in Markdown, which my blog posts are, it automatically does that for those as well. So
Okay.
it does it in a lot of places you may not think of, not just when you're using that component. So that's really great.
Cool. And so there's, on that same thought, there's lots of people who don't necessarily jump for frameworks, and that's totally okay. I have done a lot of just like building demo stuff with vanilla JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and have come across like a lot of the pain points for why frameworks exist.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to like state, like, you've probably spent a lot of time with Gridsome. I've spent a ton of time with Gatsby, and I've had a lot of pain points, but it's all worth it because I get to take advantage at the end of the day of these really, really cool features that I wouldn't be able to do myself. The alternative is I would have built something that just at the end of the day wouldn't have been as good because I wouldn't
Yep.
have these features. It wouldn't be as organized. I would have to write a bunch of code that I'm not comfortable with. So it takes care of a lot of the stuff for me. So two of the features that we're looking at that are really cool so far are built-in routing and then image optimization with the G image tag.
And I think on that same side of things, even if you weren't going to use Gridsome or Gatsby, a lot of really smart people have thought about what goes into a
Mm-hmm.
really good performance site. Take a look at the features that they're implementing in Gridsome and Gatsby, and at least just use that as a baseline. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, preloading images and having different image sizes for all the different screen sizes my visitors may come to me on is pretty important.
Yep.
So even if you're not going to use this, use that as a base to try and implement that in your own application.
Yep. Definitely, definitely with you there.
Cool. So I think what I want to do now is we showed off pages. There are other things. So as I said when we started this off, we could go into our Gridsome config and really start to build out a complex logging application. We'd have to add in some new plugins, do some configuration. But since we don't have a ton of time today, I think what I want to do is just start with a starter. So I want to create a new a new site from a starter that will give us some of the blogging capabilities out of the box. So then we can talk a little bit more about templates, how those work, how Markdown gets treated, and that kind of stuff. So
Okay.
before we do this from the command line, let's head over to the back to the browser, head back over to Gridsome, and there's a starters tab all the way at the top.
Oh, up here. Yep.
Yep. And so these are all the different starters. And again, as I said, when I first created my site, I used that out of the box starter and I built everything from scratch. And I would not advise that unless you're really just trying to learn stuff
Yep.
because, I found that, if I would have used a certain starter, it would have got me 3/4 of the way. And then at the end of the day, these are all still just like Vue components and HTML and JavaScript and CSS. You can easily customize this stuff, unlike the WordPress stuff we were talking about before. So
Yep.
what I want to do is we're going to start with a blog. So there's a Gridsome blog. Um, let's go ahead and look at Markdown. So on that left, you can see all the different platforms.
Oh, yep.
If you wanted to use I know you were working with Sanity. There's some Sanity starters
Mm-hmm.
down there. There's a whole bunch of starters, but Markdown is the one that we're going to start with. And if you scroll down to the bottom, I think there's one by Tommy, who's one of the creators of Gridsome. Maybe, oh, there it is, the Gridsome blog starter, the official one. So go ahead and click on that, and this will go ahead and just explain to you what the starter does, and like each starter has its own features, tells you what's involved. So the install now button is basically going to just give you that command that we talked about earlier, and you can copy that.
Oh, cool.
So that is copying the create command. So again, it's just creating a folder called my project, but then that next argument is the starter that you want to use.
Okay.
And there was another link there. We're not going to do this, but if you've ever used like Sandbox, you can actually open this right in a code Sandbox, which is really cool.
Okay. And then obviously a deploy to Netlify button too, which I doubt we'll get there today, but that process, or maybe we will, but that process is the same for any other Gatsby or React. You basically run a build command on a push to master in Netlify, and it will do the build and have the static site ready to go.
Exactly. Cool. So let's go back to command line and go ahead and run that command.
And I'm going to just change this to Gridsome blog.
Cool.
And now again, we have to kill the time while the packages install.
We can see if we have some comments going on over here.
Yeah, let us know how we're doing. Any questions? What do you think so far? For me, I mean, it's exactly what I expected. Something very, very, very familiar to Gatsby, and I imagine I'll see even more parallels once we have like the Markdown and querying those and generating the static pages and that sort of stuff. So this is very, very familiar to me, which is really nice.
And if you search my links to my GitHub are on my website. My whole website is open source, so I've done a bunch in Gridsome, and if you ever like need a question of like, well, how did he do that? My entire source is on GitHub, so you can always go dig through my source code if you want. That's usually how I learn a lot of things too. Just dig through somebody else's source code and go, oh, that's how they did it there.
Yep. I'm the same way, and my site is open source as well on the Gatsby side, and I've definitely gone through and seen other people's sites and just gone and looked at their source code to see what they've done and pull that into mine.
Cool. So we are in the Gridsome config again. Remember before we just started with that site name and there was an empty array of plugins. Well, now we've kind of got some more things going on in here.
Yep.
And so this is where it starts. If we want to have a plugin, there's a list of plugins on the Gridsome website. One of those plugins is the source file system. So that's going to allow us to basically read from a file system, and we can kind of configure that how we want it to. Maybe we are reading some JSON files, maybe we're reading Markdown files like we are here. But what we're saying is that we are going to take all these Markdown files and we're going to use the path, so content posts star.markdown. So if we look on our file explorer there, you can see a content folder. All the way at the top. It's not in source. Yeah.
Okay.
And so content posts. So all of these are posts. So if you click on one of those, this is just a Markdown post. And we have some front matter. So front matter is basically describing this document. So we have our title, date, all these things. And when you first create a Markdown document, none of this front matter is there. You get to go ahead and decide, what data, what are the attributes of this particular thing, because not everything is going to be a blog post. In our case it is, but we're describing what are some of the things that describe this document, and then it's really just a Markdown file from there. And you can include images, and then you can get into more plugins, like say I wanted some syntax highlighting, maybe I wanted some to be able to embed like a YouTube video or code sandbox or something. So those are like all the things.
I was going to say all of which I've done, you've probably had to do with your site as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's, again, that for me, that's the fun stuff. Like you're just like, this is my playground. I get to configure this how I want it to. So
and
let's go back.
This is exactly, again, like parallels. This is exactly what I would do in Gatsby. Have the front matter at the top, and probably that's a pretty standard thing regardless, and then just regular Markdown file.
Yep.
Sweet.
Cool. So then from the config, where that type name that we're saying there is post. And then there's something called refs, which really allow us to create a collection inside of there. And this is how like you would create some type of like hierarchical data that kind of, so in this case, we have a post and we want a bunch of tags associated with the post. And that way you would be able to do something like, hey, give me all the posts on my blog for the category view, right? So that's kind of what that is doing there.
Okay. And I don't know how I would do that, and I haven't done it in Gatsby so far. Like I played around with a tag system where I could click on a tag and only show those posts, but I was just doing filtering on the front end because
Right.
I don't have
This
that
is
many
doing it
posts. So
right. This is actually creating a GraphQL collection for you.
cool.
So
I need to look into that for Gatsby to see. I imagine there's a similar type thing, but that's really nice.
cool. So the type name there is saying post. That post is defined in that templates object above. That post is saying, hey, I want to go ahead and use the way that that path is getting created is from the slash title. So when I want to, the title is basically the key that we're working off of. So now, so the left there, so you know how we created a page in the pages directory?
Mm-hmm.
That is just going to create a page on our Gridsome site. That is a view component, just like this is. But the difference between a page and a template is a template is going to give us a collection in GraphQL. So this is basically mapping this component to a GraphQL component. So that's how you get something created in GraphQL, basically. And again, there's probably a better explanation of that on the Gridsome website, which I'm looking at now. Templates are used to create a single page, or templates are used to create single pages for nodes in a collection. So
And I
you wouldn't
think,
just create.
well, sorry, I was gonna say I think like the benefit of that is you couldn't like even though it will end up representing a page, it will represent like X number of pages, and it's also not something that you want to be taken over by the default routing stuff in the pages directory. So like Vue will
Correct.
serve the pages or the components specifically in the pages directory as a route. In this
Correct.
case, like just differentiating that this is a template that will then be reused to generate pages.
Correct. So like when I create a blog like listing page, I would still go over to pages, create,
Mm-hmm.
blog.view. Hey, this is my blog. Here is a list of the latest blog posts. And the way that I pull them is by referencing this post template.
Cool.
So the post template, if we go into that post.view, this is, again, similar thing. We have a layout. We have a bunch of things that are going on, a bunch of markup that we're doing. But if you scroll down, you can see, keep going a little bit. Now into our script, you can see that we're pulling some stuff in there. I think it's maybe below our script. Let's keep going a little bit more. Keep going. So page query.
Mm.
So this is actually making a call to GraphQL and querying the post collection. So there's some GraphQL things that are going inside of there.
And this is
So
like I don't know if you want to or not, but if we pull it up like the graphical, or it's not graphical, it's the GraphQL playground. Like we could run the same query in there. We could see real time, like what
we
would
can,
come out.
and we can actually do that. So let's go ahead and first run this using Gridsome Develop. And I just want to show the front end because, again, this gives you a nice blog out of the box that you could then just go ahead and tweak the layouts and the different pages and be good to go from there. But I just kind of want to show this off. So yeah, localhost 8080.
So with this starter project, I guess I was going to show what it was to what it is, but it already refreshed live. So
Yep. So up in the right, you got dark mode and light mode, which is
sweet.
cool right out of the box.
Yep.
And then this is just a list of those different blog posts. So if you click on one of those, then you get the actual, so yeah, you see it goes down to the title. Remember, we set that up in our Gridsome config. We set our post is basically going to work off of the title, and that Markdown file was
Mm-hmm.
mark-test-file.md. So
Yep.
that is what's turning that Markdown file into HTML file for us. Things in here are just kind of showing off, and then you see you get the blurred images
Yep.
for you right out of there. So
Sweet. And then this is at this point, like if someone is starting a blog from scratch, they could do this. They could follow the pattern of using Markdown, and then all they have to do is like basically style it at this point to be able
yep.
to have their blog. Then they could add different functionality and things they needed, but this is all they would need really to get started, and then some styling to make it feel like it's their own.
Yeah, so the only things, let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So let's look at like what we would style here. So if you look in the layouts directory, there's a layout, there's a base layout, the default one. So you would go in and you'd configure this like however you want. There's, again, at the very bottom, there's a style block, there's classes, these are the things that you would style up. There's in the pages directory, if we go into pages, so this is what I talked about before, there's still that index.vue, which is our home page. And in index.vue, we're going to create a collection. So if you look at page query there, that page query is saying, hey, go get me all the posts and let's display them on the home page. Now, they're doing some filtering here, like what published equals
Yep.
true. On the home page, you would probably want to get like a max of like 5 of them or
Yep.
whatever, or 3. You could do that as well. But we could take this and then head over to our GraphQL playground. So let's take that query.
This whole thing, and
And let's go
then
over to, yep,
explore, and it pulled it up on the wrong page, so or wrong browser. I'll type it in. So it looks like there are 3 underscores, and then explore.
yep.
So here's the biggest difference I've seen so far. Well,
No,
one, I
maybe
didn't
it's 2.
I didn't type that in. I thought it was 3. It looks like it's 3 in here. Oh, 8080,
You
not
can,
not 800.
oh, that's it. Yep.
That's what it is. So the biggest difference I've seen so far between Gridsome and Gatsby in a really cool way is it's 3 underscores before the GraphQL playground in Gridsome and only 2 in Gatsby. Otherwise,
Yep.
everything is like incredibly familiar, which is really nice.
So before we paste that in, you talked about this with Andrew Mead. I love that like this, everything is self-documenting. So on the right there, there's that docs and that schema.
Mm-hmm.
You can head over there and you go, oh, well, how do I get all my posts? Well, here it is. You can see all the different attributes. Like if I wanted to sort by or order or per page, it's given me all this documentation here on what I can actually pull out. So again, even if you asked me right now to write Gridsome queries or GraphQL queries, I don't know that I'd be able to. Like I've
Yeah.
gotten them working, but I don't use GraphQL every day. So this is like a huge help for me.
Yep. And I'm the same way. That's what I told Andrew last week was I've used it from the perspective of like I've clicked a couple of buttons and generated a query and then tweaked it for what I needed, but I didn't really have a good understanding of what was going on completely with GraphQL. Have a better understanding now, but again, it's like it's not something I do every day, so it's not something I'm really that
Right.
comfortable with.
All right, so let's try and paste that query in here and go ahead and run that.
Just run it and
And there you go. So it's going to give us all that information back.
yep. And so for each one of the nodes, which is a blog post, ID, title, date, it looks
That's
like
all the
that's all the
front
front
matter that we
matter.
got. Yep.
Does
So
it
like if you wanted something specific in there, like whatever data you wanted, if you put that in your front matter,
mm-hmm.
it's going to be returned as part of this GraphQL collection.
So here's one of the things that might be a little bit different with Gatsby. All of this front matter comes back on a property called a front matter. So you'd have like node.frontmatter.title. Are these properties just put on the root
It looks
object?
like they are. Yep.
Which I like, and the reason is I just didn't like having to write front matter dot every time. It seemed a little unnecessary. And what I would actually do is when I would query this stuff in GraphQL, I would then just translate it to copy all those properties directly on the root of the object instead of having
Yep.
them in the dot front matter property.
Cool. Yeah, and then you could see, so tags is kind of embedded in there, and that's an array. So hey, we've marked this blog post with tags of Markdown and test files. So we could do some crazy things and create a new page where we wanted to list out all of the tags, and then you can click on a tag and then get all of the posts for that.
Mm-hmm.
So
I bet. So this looks a lot nicer than what I was doing in Markdown for tags, and it's probably just. So when I started with Gatsby, I started probably with. I didn't start with a blog template. I started with Gatsby Starter, and it was at least a year ago, maybe a little bit longer. So there's a lot of things in the starter blog, same as you, I think, that I didn't
yeah,
have. And so for me, I was storing tags just as, let's see, where is one of these Markdown files?
in
Inside of,
content,
yeah,
yep,
there, oh, not image, but this one. So I was just storing them like, actually with no quotes, and I'm going to break this in a second, but it was just like comma separated string. And then I
right,
was having to like parse them in JavaScript myself, which obviously
yeah,
you don't really want to do. So this looks like it gives you. I'm assuming you could do the similar type thing in Gatsby as well, but you get the benefit of like you're actually storing it as an array, which is nice. And then also they do some extra stuff to be able to give you the filterability or searchability on tags too.
yep, yep.
Cool.
Cool. And I guess like the point I wanted to get across with the GraphQL stuff, I said it earlier. Don't let GraphQL scare you off. It's really easy to get in here, start messing around with things. And again, most of the time, all you're doing is getting a list of things or getting a single thing. So
Mm-hmm.
you'll be able to kind of figure all that stuff out.
Yep. Yeah. When you're doing an index page to list out all of your blogs or courses, you're grabbing all of them and displaying like a card probably or like a short description. Then you have the
Yep.
details page, which is its own static page that gets built um, for that specific post or course or whatever.
Yep. Yep.
Cool.
Cool. And there actually is a tag component in here. If you look at tag.vue,
Uh,
template, sorry.
oh, template. Oh, inside of templates, there's a tag
Yep.
view. Oh, okay, cool.
Tag.vue. So that gives you an example of like how that works.
So it has, yeah, it's got a postcard for
Yep.
each one of, um, is it
And you
each,
see,
is
so
it,
it's querying that tag.
and then it's displaying all the posts for that tag.
Yep.
Cool.
Page.tag.belongs to, yeah.
Okay.
So it's
Sweet.
setting up a relationship between the two, which is really nice.
Okay. I've got a question that I'm not clear on, and you can tell me if it's something you were going to go to or next. Is there anything that goes on? There's not. Okay, so now I need to go back. So the reason I'm a bit confused slash maybe really, really impressed is this use file system or this file system plugin. We're telling it the name is going to be post. I'm pretty sure that in GraphQL is where like that's where all post comes from is because that's the type the name that we used for that.
Correct.
And then it's saying want to grab all of the files on the file system that are inside of the post directory that have a markdown ending.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing does the tag stuff. What I would have to do inside of Gatsby is they've got a Gatsby node file. Inside of the Gatsby node file, there's an export pages function that I can write. Inside the export pages, I have to iterate through each one of the posts and then tell it basically call a create page. And I call create page by passing a template file, a component, and then the path of where I want that file to live, which is basically going to be the slug property of the post, and the actual ID of that post so that that page knows how to render it. Is there not, like, is this what we just looked at where it generates the pages for the blog post? That's it? Like it does that for you?
That's it. Yep. So
Hmm.
there is some like really great things. If you want to like dynamically create pages, there's an API for that. So I haven't actually ever had to do that, but like if you wanted to like pull a list of pages from somewhere and dynamically create all of those pages yourself and then maybe go update those as they change like somewhere else on the server, there is an API to do that, but you don't need to do that in here. Gridsome's doing that for you.
That's really cool because and so if people use Gatsby, if you know a way that you can actually generate those static pages without having to define how in the Gatsby node file, let me know. That is really interesting because that's just, it was confusing when I got into it at first in the Gatsby node file of figuring out what the create pages API is now, or what it is. Now it's a lot easier and I understand what's going on, but it was a learning curve. All of this is basically just taken care of for us, which is wild. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, and I would say if you want to learn a little bit more about that, again, head into the docs. There's a section in there on how to dynamically create pages if you need to. But like I said, it's not something that I've had to do. So.
Sweet. I'm curious, anyone in the chat, one, just kind of checking in with everybody that's still here. And let me know, one, if you knew that about Gridsome. And then if you know a way that that kind of takes care of itself in Gatsby without using the Gatsby node file. If I'm missing it, then I've been missing out for a while, which again, like I'm comfortable with it now, but it's an extra step that apparently you don't have to do with Gridsome. Really cool.
Yep. Just trying to think if I wanted to cover anything else. And I guess this would probably be the same as like Gatsby, but if you look at the post.vue template and you look in the script tag, there is a there's a meta info, and so that is allowing you to go ahead and set meta information on each of those posts. So now when I want the title in the meta tag, I can go ahead and do that, and then you can go ahead and create other meta tags. And so if you were to look at my blog, I have a bunch of meta tags for being able to create like friendly images for like Twitter or for Facebook using the open graph image tags and all of that stuff. So when you want to like share stuff out, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, you can go ahead and add all of those tags in here as well. So there's a nice way to go ahead and do that. So
okay. So question about that for you, and this is it's less Gridsome and just how do you do this in general? Do you manually create all of your images for your social cards, or do you have some sort of like automated process for generating them?
So I don't create, so I create all the images for my blog posts from scratch. I do use some like templates, but if you were to head over to the blog and like look at the card, the card, the image that's on top, I've created that. But then I go ahead and take that and like those different kind of cards that are on the blog post. So I create that, but then I use that meta info to say, all right, that particular card image is in the front matter of this post. Go grab that and create all of those different meta tags that it needs to create. So go ahead and click on that and then just inspect like the title or the head area of the document.
And I got to a point. So one of the things I haven't done is I'm not fully invested in my blog as a platform. I have been a writer for Scotch for a while and have done like bigger articles that then coincide with YouTube videos. And what I wanted to do was start doing more smaller articles on mine just to get more content out there and for reference for me, like for something small that I might not remember later on. But the issue was I wasn't creating cover images for each one of those. So a few people are using, like they are real dynamically generating their Twitter cards, getting into like serverless functions and all kinds of stuff. That I thought was really interesting. But I think for me, I'll probably go more the route you're doing. I just need to get a simple template for like, if I have a blog post that I'm not that invested in, here's a basic template that just does a title and that's it, just so there is an image.
Yeah, and there are other things you could do. Like if every time you create a new Markdown file, like I actually wrote a generator that kind of generates all that front matter for me. You could add something into that workflow that just goes out and grabs a random image from like Unsplash and uses that.
True.
And just so you can get that content out there, you can always come back and change that later.
True.
But you see those like meta tags, like Twitter card, Twitter site, like those are all the things that you need to like when you share it out on Twitter, you get the nice image there. And that all goes inside of that meta info back in our post.vue. So
and somewhere is the specific like, maybe that one. But then there's also like an OG image, this one here. And if I open this, it's just going to take me to that image, which is hosted on your site. So this is like the static image that you're saying, this is the one I want you to use.
Exactly.
Sweet. Cool. Yeah, I actually need to double back and update that for mine because one, again, I haven't added cover images for all of them, and I was at one point just defaulting to a cover image. I think like the icon I use for my site, which is not good. And one, I need to create all of them. But then when I migrated to Sanity, I commented some of that stuff out. So I actually am not specifying those at all right now in my blog. So I need
Right.
to get that back in.
Yeah, and I even did one for like my homepage. I created an image that just had like my face on it and said danvega.dev. So if somebody shares my image on
Mm,
Twitter, you at least get a nice like card with it.
I need to do that
Because
too. Yeah.
because those cards they're a lot more shareable, especially on something like Twitter. Like you just like it stands out in the feed a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that on my to-do list in Trello because I right now I think it's just grabbing like my face image, which is like that's not the thing that I want to share when I share my site. So, by the way, we've got Chris Mars is in the chat. I don't know if you know him online, but really big in CSS and accessibility, and doing some
Yep.
more in JavaScript and Gatsby recently. Um,
Awesome. Yeah, I actually met Chris at Code Mash.
oh,
So
sweet. Okay, I forget how small the community is sometimes. So glad you have met. By the way, I've heard amazing things about Code Mash and have wanted to go. I spoke at the like brother or sister conference. Gosh, what's that conference? It literally called that conference.
um oh, that
Yeah.
conference.
At least I think it's brother or sister conference because it's also at the same like type of resort type thing.
Gotcha.
Anyway, but I've heard really good things and have wanted to speak there and attend because I've heard it's so much fun. So maybe
It's
once we
crazy. It's probably Sandusky's probably about an hour from my house, and
okay.
I think this was their 14th year, and I had never gone before. Like
Oh,
every
cool.
year, it's like the first week of January, so I'd always like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, next year I'm gonna go. But then it's like the new year, and you just get like
Yeah.
caught up in stuff. So finally, I submitted a talk on Vue 3. I got accepted, and man, that conference was just so much fun. Definitely recommend it to anyone.
Sweet. I wonder if like maybe I've always thought talks would be really interesting. So like before I had gotten into React, I always thought it'd be interesting to do a talk on like what React looked like for me my first time. And so I'm thinking about like a Gatsby versus Gridsome talk where it's like here's what having experience with Gatsby but no experience in Vue look like in picking up Gridsome. Maybe one
Yeah,
day I'll
it'd
get
be
that
fun.
written or maybe just a YouTube video too.
Yeah, that I mean, there's so many virtual conferences going on now too.
Mhm.
So yeah, cool. Well, I think that's really all I had to show off. I mean, there's a lot we could get into in the weeds, but that's kind of the basics of Gridsome. Again, go into the documentation. The docs are really good at kind of explaining each of those little things we talked about today, and a whole bunch more. So.
Cool. So I'll do just a little bit of recap, at least from my perspective, on what we did and what the parallels are between Gridsome and Gatsby. One, I haven't like read the docs myself like in depth, obviously, but the site looks really nice. It looks like it's organized pretty well in terms of docs. That's one of the big things about Gatsby is their documentation and their community. I think is just really really good. I've kind of experienced the same thing with people that I've talked to online about Gridsome as well. Another thing that is really huge with Gatsby is their plugin ecosystem. And so there's a plugin here, plugin pay. I mean, I I don't know if Gridsome was like specifically a copy of Gatsby on Vue, but it seems that way and how similar it is. But plugin ecosystem here looks like there's a bunch. I'm assuming they've got a similar array of plugins to do different things. And that's one of the big ones with Gatsby is like every time I had something I needed to do, there's almost certainly a plugin to help do it. And I bet
Yep.
like if I search for Sanity, for example, there's the Gridsome source Sanity, and it's going to allow me to work with Sanity as my headless CMS, just like I did in Gatsby.
Yep.
So all of that stuff looks really cool. When we actually got into creating a project, you get a Gridsome CLI equivalent, basically in my mind, to a Gatsby CLI. You get a create command, a develop command, and a build command, which we won't deploy. But if we were to set up continuous integration in Netlify, we would tell it you want to run the Gridsome build command when it gets there. and then serve like the dist folder. It's or public or whatever folder it goes to.
Yep. Dist. Yep.
Okay. And we also talked about kind of like, here's the idea of what Gridsome is on the site, and you can bring any type of data you want. It's powered by GraphQL, very similar to Gatsby. Do a build, you get that deploy process, which is really cool. We created a Gridsome starter, and the Gridsome starter is pretty bare. It had nothing in like the configuration, no plugins, or it had very little in the config file. It had no plugins, things like that. And it's just the base, what you get. Routing is built in. That worked exactly as I expected. I create a new component inside of the route, update the nav bar so that it's included there, and then it works really nice. And there's images. So image optimizations, that's one of the things that I think is really, really sweet about Gatsby, which looks like it's basically the same type of thing in Gridsome. And so you get the blurred effect, lazy loading, all these image optimization things that are really, really cool. And then we got into creating a Gridsome project with a starter, the starter blog, and it did all the things that I expected, except it did something a little bit nicer. Again, like in Gatsby, I have to go through and tell it how to create the pages for the blog post. It didn't seem like you had to do that at all. You just kind of specify, these are the files that I want to become a page, and this is the template to use for it. And Gridsome took care of all of that, which is really, really amazing.
Yep.
Talked a little bit about like social cards and doing metadata. I think that for me, the syntax of Vue still is a little bit to learn, obviously. And just like everything basically, maybe if you have a minute or two, do you mind explaining a little bit of like the JavaScript syntax? So like you've got a script, you can import stuff, you're exporting an object, which has a components object. And then I'm assuming just like however many helper functions you need for that component.
Right. So this is called the options API. Basically, everything that we're passing in here is a object of options. So the components object is, hey, these are all the components I want to make available in my template. There's a data function that can return an object. That is where you declare all your reactive data. So if you need something to go ahead and be watched by Vue, you declare it there. There's a methods block where methods are defined. And so that is the options API in Vue. Again, getting into the Vue 3, there's a composition API where everything's kind of declared in a setup function, and then you just kind of write your normal JavaScript. So that's something you can take a look at kind of on the Vue side if you want to jump into the documentation. That's why I do say like there is a prerequisite there of understanding a little bit of Vue. So
yep, fair enough. And one of the things that like we're wrapping up, so we won't see this in person, but you mentioned there was a data property where you could specify like reactive data, or maybe for people who come from like a data binding perspective, it's two-way data binding, which is not something that you get out of the box with React. You have to tell it like, define, here's the value that I want to use, but then also have an updater function for when that input changes. For example, here's how to update the variable in state behind the scenes. And it's like forms in React are just kind of tedious, honestly, if you write them all yourself. So I've always been interested, or I've seen people show and been interested in the fact that like two-way binding is just kind of there out of the box, right? There's nothing else you have to do.
Yeah, so when you create a data function that returns an object, any property that you basically declare in there, Vue will behind the scenes create a getter and a setter for you and make those reactive. There are obviously ways if for some reason you need a little more control and you want to write your own getter or setter, you can, but that's just underneath the hood for you. And then as you make changes to that property, it is reactive and just makes changes to the DOM wherever it needs to. So.
Yep. And that's, didn't mean to bring your camera over there. I meant to just move it to another screen. You popped up 2 times on the stream for a second. Yeah. So that, so Marcus commented, saying, just impressed to see how similar they are, obviously different in their own ways, but first time looking at Gridsome after having some Gatsby experience just makes it feel like you could go and jump in right now. And I think I'm the same way. I could take what I've got, I could customize this a little bit, I could do a few things, and I could have a little bit different version of the starter that I would need. And especially with the plugin ecosystem, if I looked into that and find things that are pretty familiar to me, then yeah, I think I could like fill most of the gaps with having very little Vue knowledge. So yeah, it's just I've taught a boot camp, so I have some teaching experience too, in Memphis last year, and we started
Cool.
with Python and we did Django as the framework, and I really wanted to stress that like regardless of what we do in this class specific to Python, all of these concepts are the exact same. Like with a web
Yeah.
server, you're creating endpoints. An endpoint, you define like the route, you define what you decide what things you return. You can access query parameters. Like all of those concepts are the exact same. The code is slightly different, but at the end of the day, like frameworks across the board just do basically the same kind of stuff. And I think it's really important for especially learning developers to understand that and really embrace the concepts of whatever platform they're in because they will be applied in other platforms as well.
Yep, couldn't have said it better. I mean, we teach Vue at our boot camp, but we
Mm-hmm.
teach like the fundamentals of component-based JavaScript systems so that
Yep.
like if you wanted to move to React or Angular, like you should be able to do that really quickly.
Yep.
So
And the more, obviously, the more you do that and the more you bounce around, you're more well versed. But even with just having one language, one framework, that those core concepts are going to carry over regardless.
for sure.
Cool. Any just to give people in the chat a minute or two for any additional questions, anything about Dan specifically, anything about Vue that he might could answer, anything about Gridsome, or anything at all. Throw that in the chat. I'll wait just a minute or two to see if there's anything left before we wrap up. In the meantime, again, just to plug your stuff. danvega.dev is your website. Got a newsletter you can sign up for. I've actually gone through and read a couple of your articles. I still, again, like not having Vue experience, I don't really understand what the composition API is, but I've gone through and looked a little bit. Anyway, so definitely check out Dan's site. And I think you've got a question in here, which I think is a shout out to your design. Dan, can you tell us about your background art? Those are some
Wow,
awesome prints.
that is the first time that anyone has ever commented on my graphic design abilities. I don't feel like I feel like I am not good at UI design at all. It's something I'm interested in and I'm constantly trying to get better at. That's why I love working on front end projects because I'm like trying to make like better looking websites, but I don't think of myself as being any good at any UI stuff. So thank you so much for the compliment.
And
I,
I kind of throw myself in the same boat there. And I think we mentioned this earlier. Like I was really a fan of your thumbnails and stuff on YouTube videos, and the ones on your cards on your blog as well. So I think they look really good.
well, I appreciate that.
No. Any last questions? Anyone in the chat? There's like the awkward silence again, which I don't like. For these streams, when I cross post to YouTube, I don't go through and splice out stuff like that. Like it's a pretty raw one, except for like the first 10 minutes where people are just waiting.
Yep.
So anyway, for people that are here as we wrap up, you can check out the video later on if you want to rewatch it or share with your friends. Probably Monday is when, or actually Wednesday probably for this one because I've got to get yesterday's one out on Monday, I think. But James Q Quick on YouTube to check out all those video. danvega.dev and Dan Vega on YouTube as well. And then the last thing is just for Auth0, the company that I work for. We are going to be doing streams and starting off, well, we've actually done a couple, but doing streams consistently on the Auth0 channel. And we'll be doing a collab with Gatsby, actually, that I'm super excited about on May 5th. So keep an eye out for that one. And hopefully I'll see some of you there. But Dan, I don't know if you have any final words, but we'll go ahead and kind of wrap it up.
Nope. Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun. I had some fun. I always love talking about Vue and Gridsome, so I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for being here. And I'll have to double check who I have next Friday before I misspeak about this. But thanks everyone that was here as well. I'm going to go ahead and call it a day and stop the stream. But I will see you in a future video or stream or on Twitter or somewhere out there in the world. Thanks everyone.